looks can be deceiving. Take this guy, for example. He's having the time of his life. He's out in nature on a lovely sunny day, getting fresh air and exercise, and he's got a project on the go. Catching that roadrunner. How could you possibly think there was something wrong with him? But isn't that what we always say when someone disappears from our lives suddenly? We saw the signs, the solitude, the intelligence never quite fulfilled, the skeletal body of someone not maintaining a healthy diet. There are plenty of insects, fish and fruit for him to eat, but he's made sure to set a goal so ambitious that he can only possibly consider himself a failure. Wile E. Coyote is spiraling into self-destruction, literally and existentially. There's one clue right there in the name. It's not the mentally well-adjusted tunes, it's Looney Tunes. And Wiley's not the only one. Bugs Bunny, with his manipulative behavior and mood swings, is a textbook case of borderline personality disorder. The Roadrunner himself, so easily distracted and constantly in motion, might consider an ADHD assessment, while the less said about the Tasmanian Devil, the better. There's a surprisingly large amount of writing on the mental health of the Looney Tunes. I recommend Dr. George Burton's article in Life as a Human and Natalie Frank's piece in Mental Gecko. But it's worth reiterating that these interpretations were surely not intentional. It's possible, probable in fact, that in the late 1940s, when Chuck Jones and Michael Maltese created Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, they weren't familiar with the concept of depression as we now know it today. The condition wouldn't be added to the United States DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, for another 3 decades, while discussions of mental health at the time were mostly limited to psychiatrists' offices and Emily Dickinson poems rather than children's cartoons. Nonetheless, there are certain aspects of Wile E. Coyote's life that, when I watch today, help me express feelings that so often seem beyond my grasp. Like this one, for instance. This is arguably the defining image of poor Wile E. Coyote. More so than him strapped to an Acme rocket and hurtling headfirst into a mural of a tunnel that he painted himself. More so even than the aftermath of his reckless abandon, as he careers down the cliff edge to his doom. It's a scenario that has been referenced and parodied in film and TV for decades, and it's even caught the attention of economists who use the term Wile E. Coyote effect to describe consumers spending money they don't have to fight financial and social hardship until they reach a point where they can't possibly pay the money back. Finally, they recognize the intractable situation that they find themselves in, and there's nothing anyone can do but wait for the inevitable. That's what makes this scenario so compelling. It's not simply that your desperation has blinded you to your surroundings. There's nothing funny about running headlong off a cliff and plummeting to your death. The humour is in the moment before the fall, the anticipatory moment when everyone acknowledges what's about to happen. While he hangs in mid-air, defying the forces of nature, which patiently wait for him to acknowledge his hubris. If only he didn't look down, the coyote would not be subject to the consequences of his actions. He is doomed not by his first mistake, going over the edge of the outcropping, but by his second, stopping. It's completely illogical, but here we have it. Wile E. Coyote is a classic overthinker. It's a symptom of several mental health issues, including depression and anxiety, and it can be most simply described as behaving as if the worst possible outcome of a given situation has already happened. The depressed person has made extensive plans for life-changing moments that never transpired. They've ruined friendships and relationships in a desperate attempt to recover from some barely perceptible personality flaw or long-forgotten indiscretion. In each of these alternate realities, their lives have been shaped not by their own actions, but by the things that may yet happen to them, as if they were powerless to stop them. Is it possible to simply not look down? To walk back that supposedly catastrophic mistake while hanging in the air but having not yet fallen, paralyzed by the possibility of what might happen? Our friends think it's possible. Just don't worry about it, they say. It'll be fine. But that's never how the scene plays out. There's a force stronger than gravity that compels us, like Wile E, to acknowledge what's about to happen and will it into existence. Every setup needs a punchline. Every conflict needs a climax. The fall, it seems, is inevitable. In his 1999 autobiography, Looney Tunes animation director Chuck Jones revealed that there are 9 rules, or laws, by which the writers and artists of Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner were bound. For example, Rule 1. The Roadrunner cannot harm the Coyote except by going beep beep, which, parenthetically, settles the debate about whether he says beep or meep. Rule 2 states that no outside force can harm the Coyote, only his own ineptitude or the failure of the Acme products. And Rule 5 that the Roadrunner must stay on the road, otherwise, logically, he would not be called a road runner. The list appears to have been created after Michael Maltese, who wrote the first 16 installments, left Warner Brothers in 1959. And most of these laws are similarly functional, ensuring that each writer recognized a universal setting and tone. But there are 2 laws that tell us more about Wile E as a person, or as a coyote. Rule 3 says he could stop any time if he were not a fanatic. And the final rule, number 9, the coyote is always more humiliated than harmed by his failures. What exactly differentiates humiliation from harm? Being humiliated can be a hurtful experience, and for some it can create physical pain. You tense up, you don't want to move, there's a pit in your stomach, like you've been hit in the head by an anvil. Mental health advocates love to say that we should treat mental health in the same way we do physical health, but many of these ailments already have a somatic element. With enough exposure, the pain of humiliation, whether real or imagined, can become the sort of long-term injury that requires rehabilitation in the form of therapy. But Wile E is lucky in this regard. We never see him in the offices of Freudy Cat. So what can we learn from his experiences? Let's look more about what Chuck Jones might mean by humiliation. It's tied up in a lot of related concepts, such as shame and embarrassment. But I would argue there are 2 distinguishing features to humiliation. The first is that it requires an audience. Humiliation is something that's inflicted upon us, and it's rooted in a specific moment. This is perhaps why our first instinct upon being humiliated is to get out of the room as soon as possible. There's no real benefit to doing this. The damage has already been done, and we'll take our embarrassment with us as we leave, but there will at least be no one there to witness us. It's why we talk about a humiliating experience, or mention it in the past tense. I was humiliated, whereas similar feelings often remain in the present. I feel ashamed, or I am so embarrassed. The second characteristic of humiliation is that it preys on our anxieties. It's the feeling of a group that you desperately want to be a part of saying, "You are not one of us." It's being made to feel as though there is something fundamentally wrong with you. It's seemingly easy for bullies to hone in on the things that we're self-conscious about, our looks, our discomforts, our social standing. But their judgments are all the more painful when they strike things that, until that moment, we liked about ourselves. Wile might be to blame for the situations he has got himself into, and that might make him worthy of ridicule. But the thing that truly humiliates him is not simply that he's failed, it's that the Roadrunner has exposed the very thing that gives Wile his personal identity. His intricate, devious plans are foiled without a second thought, and he has been made to look anything but wily. A humiliating experience can be a lot less damaging if you can point the blame at someone else. For Wile, this is difficult. It's hard to tell who exactly is responsible for his downfall. His plans, though convoluted, should work eventually, and it's not as though he's been outsmarted. Contrary to what the writers might say, his failures are rarely the result of his incompetence, but misfortune. The Roadrunner is lucky more than smart, while other defeats can be attributed to the quality control department of the Acme Corporation. It's as though Wile E. Coyote's failure is simply inevitable. Even the laws of nature themselves are capricious, reality bending in favor of the Roadrunner and closing in his face. The world itself is out to get him. So as he flees his latest humiliation amid a cloud of smoke, or disappears beyond view into a chasm, it must be hard for him not to doubt himself. Am I really a Wile E. Coyote at all? Maybe I'm a worthless coyote. This thought pattern can feel impossible to resolve, and so many of us who feel a similar sense of humiliation address it in the only way we can. We remove the audience. We isolate ourselves and withdraw socially. We say as little as possible to avoid further embarrassment. We stop trying altogether because no matter what we do, we know that our plans will blow up in our faces. Let's go back to this image. We never see what happens after Wile snapped back to reality. Sometimes we see his desperate attempts to rescue the situation, but usually we're privy only to a silhouette that whistles down the canyon, the rest left to the imagination. It's our dark night of the soul, our panic attacks and depressive episodes kept locked away, alluded to in passing, but never witnessed. You might think it purely cartoon logic that in the very next scene, Wile's back at it, a new plan more elaborate than the last, without a single injury to show. But Wile and us, we're not that different. We keep turning up to work, to social functions. We resume our lives, battered and harmed on the inside, but to everyone but a few people paying particularly close attention, it's as if the last scene never happened. Anyone who suffered from depression long enough knows that the goal isn't to conquer our affliction and become, quote, normal. It's more modest than that. It's almost impossible to stop the negative thoughts altogether without in some way compromising the things that we think make us who we are. All we can do is recognize our unhealthy patterns and try to learn from them. It might look as though Wile is a long way from that sense of mindfulness. But consider this. Where does he get that parasol from? It's as much a part of his arsenal as any Acme product. He uses it countless times to protect himself from falling rocks and debris, or to break his fall as he drops from a great height. If the rockets and bombs and anvils are a symbol of his self-destructive tendencies, then the parasol is a sign of his self-preservation. It's a flimsy and impractical item that we can't imagine he intended to use for such a purpose. It was surely bought for happier times, the same reason anyone uses a parasol, to protect them not from explosions, but sunburn while out socializing or relaxing on the beach. And it's hard to say how effective the parasol is as a method of self-defense. Wile endures the same fate whether or not he deploys it. But it proves one thing. He came prepared. He's not stupid. He's not run into the situation blindly. He knows that there is a chance, an inevitability almost, that pursuing his desires will end with him being hurt. but he goes ahead anyway. The story of Wile E. Coyote is not one of an incompetent buffoon. It's not even an inspiring story of resilience in the face of constant rejection. It's the tragedy of someone who is more prepared for failure than success. Wile E. Coyote, in fact, catches the Roadrunner on 3 occasions, but each time he's undone by his own surprise at the situation. Only one of them, from this episode, 1980's Soup or Sonic, is part of the official canon. So chasing the Roadrunner through a series of pipes that alternately shrink or enlarge the two of them, the Coyote catches up to the Roadrunner, and in this beautifully terrifying shot, discovers that he remains in his shrunken state and pulls out this sign. Many of us who experience depression have moments like this. The symptoms fade into the background for weeks at a time, maybe months or years, and each time it can feel like we've turned a corner. All that hard work and pain and suffering has finally paid off. But there is always a new problem, and soon enough, the next episode begins and we're right back to where we started. You don't need to be depressed to have moments in your life when it feels as though you're hurtling uncontrollably towards the edge of a cliff. But for the Roadrunners of this world, the idea of going over the edge is simply not part of their nature. For the Coyotes, it can seem so frustratingly simple, and we wonder what's wrong with us that we can't do the same. Even once we're over the outcropping, we wonder why we weren't able to calmly walk back onto land. Why is it only us that this happens to? Are we forever going to be haunted by that compulsion to chase that damned bird? All we can really do is find our parasol, the thing that breaks our fall, or at least makes us feel as though we have some control over the situation. Take a deep breath, write your feelings down, accept this is what's happening, and know that while it's going to hurt, you'll soon be back atop the canyon.